Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we're devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. Today's Tuesday, February 11th. I'm Dan Moulthrop. I'm the Chief Executive here, and I'll be moderating our conversation today, where we will be assessing the impacts of the changes to immigration policy brought on by this new administration, by the Donald Trump administration. According to ProPublica, the administration has put out 27 executive orders related to immigration. That's just the executive orders related to immigration. This is the list. There are 27 of them. If we spent 2 minutes on each one, we'd have enough time to introduce the panelists. So we're not going to do that. But they do a range of things. They declare a crisis at the border. They target sanctuary communities. They limit temporary protected status. They pressure other nations to accept deportees and to accommodate asylum seekers on their side of the border. And there's a number of other things as well, about 24 other things. Communities across the nation are feeling the impacts of these changes, and our communities here in Northeast Ohio are certainly among those communities feeling the impacts. As many of you know, there were in fact raids by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, also known as ICE, in late January here in Northeast Ohio. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but today we're going to unpack some of these executive orders, some of what's happening on the ground, and how our communities are faring, what the future policies and legal battles may be moving forward. Joining us next to me, Margaret Wong. She's the founding and managing partner of Margaret W. Wong & Associates, LLC. Margaret, thank you so much for being with us. Next to her is Mark Owens. He's Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Team NEO. He is with us today representing Team NEO. He has some other roles that you may be aware of. He's also an immigrant himself. Mark, thank you for joining us. Selena Pagan is the Executive Director of the Young Latino Network. Great to have you here. And Joe Cimperman is President of Global Cleveland. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. If you have a question and you'd like to text it in, you can text that question to 330-541-5794, and we'll work it into the second half of the program. You can also, of course, during the second half, stand up and ask your questions at the microphone as well. Thank you all so much for joining us. Before we start, I wanted to ask how many immigrants we have in the room right now. Show of hands. Now, how many of you, yes, please. If you guys could keep your hands up for a second, how many of you, those of you who don't have your hands up yet, how many of you are the child of immigrants? Okay. And how many of you are the grandchildren of immigrants? Okay. All right. Give yourselves all a round of applause. We could go back many generations, but I just wanted to level set. I was sort of thinking about my own personal history and the personal history of all of us on the stage here. Margaret, you were involved in representing some of the detainees who were caught up in the local raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and I wonder if you would provide us with a little update.
5 of the 6 are out as of last week. One that have a prior order of removal decided not to fight the system and decided to go home. So in all, it's a very nice experience, and I think Cleveland is fighting back on these raids. But let me also bring up one point I think that's very important. It's not just the raids, it's the way they do it, the way they say, well, we're looking for someone else. I just talked to another person this morning, same thing. They stopped him on the road. They say, do you know this person? I'm looking for this person, and then they took him. So I wonder who this person is that they're all looking over at Cleveland. But
is there one particular person that they...
I still am trying to find out.
You're still trying to figure it out.
Yes.
Margaret, the other 5 who were a lot of what we've heard from the Trump administration has been that they're trying to target people who have broken the law, laws other than our immigration laws, other than entering the country illegally without authorization or documentation. Those 5 that you mentioned, did any of them have a criminal record?
None. In fact, all 6 have no criminal records. But the interesting thing is on the form they asked, were you ever arrested, detained, or cited by any law enforcement agent? Most people would say no. But then now immigration may say they have lied because whenever they're stopped at the border or whenever they volunteer themselves at the border, it's considered a detained. So according to ICE and CBP, oh, you have lied because you did not volunteer, you were stopped. So I think that's a very interesting point. And
so that quote-unquote lie then constitutes an additional violation of the law.
That's one thing they're saying. Right?
Wow.
But that's a 6C, that's a material misrepresentation.
Mm-hmm. Joe Cimperman, I want to turn to you. One of the executive orders stopped refugee resettlement, and then another order halted a lot of payments that many refugee resettlement agencies depend on. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening with refugees in our community and refugees also who we're expecting to arrive in our community?
Sure. First, Dan, I want to thank you and the City Club for having this forum, for seeing the people who raised their hand the first, second, or third time. Could I ask, if you raised your hand at all, could you raise your hand again? I like us. I like this. Cleveland has been home for resettling refugees since our first refugee resettlement agency, the oldest in the world, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, started bringing people here, formed because a lot of people wouldn't resettle Jewish refugees, so they did. Now resettling everybody from all over the world, along with Catholic Charities and USCRI. Cleveland was in its peak years receiving 1,500 people. And what I like to do, Dan, when we talk to folks about this, I like to say unrestricted work visa, vetted by Homeland Security 14 times, must pay their plane ticket back to the United States before becoming citizens in 7 years, contributing members of society, we call them refugees. And I say that because so often that word is a trigger. And we're up here because there's clearly a lot of pain in the community, but I will say this to you, Dan, 23 and 24, Ohio saw its greatest growth of immigrants since the war. Over 80,000 people moved to Ohio, internationally born. And if you looked at the domestic community of native-born people, if we only counted them, Ohio would have lost people. So we tend to look at this demographically. We tend to look at this as we don't want to lose another congressperson in 3 years when the census comes. And so I think the reason why this forum is so important and we reframe the way we look at refugees and international newcomers is that it's been looked at as people who are less than. And when I look at Margaret Wong, phenomenal attorney, employing hundreds of people, Mark Owens, incredible marketing director for Team Neo, Dr. Mihalovich at the Cleveland Clinic, I see people that have only added to the beauty of Northeast Ohio, and the refugee folks do that too. When the executive order came out to pull the funding, what happened was all the people who were here, about 205, were legally settled here, and the administration said, we're not going to give you any more resources for it. It's about $300,000 to continue paying rent, to continue with the needs that we have for all the things that come with a 90-day resettlement. We're very close to being there, thanks to a lot of folks in this room who I'm not sure I'm supposed to thank publicly yet. Cleveland Foundation, Gun Foundation, Mandel Foundation. But I'm going to say this to you. We talk to a lot of other cities. As difficult as this time is, Northeast Ohio is better prepared than most, and we need to continue to lean into the resilience of this room.
Why is that we're better prepared than most?
Because we've been fighting this before it was cool. Because, and I'll say this, and I hope this isn't disrespectful, there really hasn't been a great Democrat or Republican administration that's done this right. It's who we don't like that day. And this is a deeper issue than who's in office right now. That's why this is not a political conversation. And I think it's in our DNA. And I think when you look around the room, you can see why, and we have to continue doing what we can day by day.
Thank you, Joe. Selena Pagan from the Young Latino Network, you are, as a network, you're sort of an organization that is networked to lots of other organizations. Tell us what you're hearing from across the many Latina communities that are our neighbors.
Yeah, I think, hi everyone. Selena Pagan, maybe my first and last time on this stage. We'll see how this conversation goes. I think we need to frame the conversation, though, in acknowledging that there are two tales of immigration that happen here, right? And oftentimes, there are the more desired immigrants based on what they can contribute to the society and our census data and our numbers. And then there are those that are deemed that are not contributing to this community for some reason, right? That are typically the Black and brown folks in our communities. And so that, I think, has been the reality that I've been facing with my community and with my organization and our staff and our teams of volunteers. The reality of how immigration impacts Black and brown people, which is typically a whole nother ballgame, right? We saw throughout that last election cycle how our Haitian community members in Springfield were attacked. We see what's happening in Cleveland with Latina businesses being targeted, right? And so, we feel like there's a target on our backs right now. And who am I as a Puerto Rican woman who has the privilege of having U.S. citizenship on this stage talking about immigration? This is some weird stuff happening right now. But as an organizer and someone who is out in the streets all the time with our community members, as a daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants who has businesses in Northeast Ohio, people are scared for a lot of reasons, and that tactic is working. That tactic is working on our community, and folks are not showing up to work. Kids are not showing up to school. Folks are uncertain of their future, and it's weird because that tactic is also driving this narrative that we have to live in fear. And so right now, our safety is at threat, right? And so I think to Joe's point, the infrastructure for Cleveland to respond to certain parts of immigration, yes, we have a robust ecosystem of refugee and asylum orgs who are resourced and have done this before. I think specific to the Latina community and the generations of Latina leaders that have been here is understanding the nuances within our own community to be able to act faster to these attacks, right? And to have rapid response infrastructure for our communities. For when things like this happen, we have a clear repository of resources. We have clear lines of communication to share information. And then we have the dollars and the resources to have our communities back in times like this.
Selena, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned people not showing up to work, not showing up to school. The Wall Street Journal had a piece this morning noting that this is the case with both documented and undocumented immigrants. In other words, there are documented immigrants, authorized immigrants who just have fear.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's a whole conversation with the Puerto Rican diaspora around how this impacts, even though we have U.S. citizenship, which is insane, but there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and a lot of community education that needs to happen. And this is my first time as a young executive director leading an organization to face this front, but there are a lot of other executive directors who have lived through this and have experienced this. But we still, we don't have a game plan that puts us in a proactive mode versus a reactive mode to address these situations.
Just to provide you some real-time feedback, I think you're doing great. I think you're going to wind up on the stage again in the future if you keep going this way.
Well done.
Mark Owens, on the other hand, I'm not so sure about.
This work goes downhill now. Sorry.
Mark, you're with Team Neo, and that same article that I was just talking about also referenced labor shortages. And referenced also tariffs. We're not going to get to that, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and the immigration changes to immigration policy have created a lot of uncertainty for employers. You work with a lot of employers. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so thanks, Dan, again for inviting me here today, and for the audience. Thanks for everyone for being here. Thanks to my Team Neo colleagues as well for supporting and cheering me on. So, yeah, we talked to Team NEO. We are the region's economic development agency for Northeast Ohio, working with Jobs Ohio and all our other stakeholders, including Global Cleveland. And we talked to employers, both currently in the region, but also prospective employers that are looking at Northeast Ohio as possibly a new destination for a new office space, a new facility, a new manufacturing plant. And one of the main issues we still come across every day is the issue of lack of talent. They constantly tell us they can't find enough talent. We have, our economy is great here right now. The business is going well. There are jobs out there, but there's companies looking to grow, and they constantly tell our teams we need more people. So as we look around, reference what Joe talked about earlier in terms of the growth of Ohio last year was solely down to immigrants, inward growth, right, from international newcomers, and that's a positive. At Team NEO, we kind of look at, as we look out 5 years, 10 years out in terms of where we see the Northeast Ohio region going. How can we bend that curve of the current trajectory we're on in terms of a aging population, declining students staying in the state. We look at ways, how do we bend that curve? And one of those ones we've looked at is through our partnerships with our colleges and our universities in the region. We have a large base of international students that have chosen to come here as students. They've chosen Northeast Ohio. They're paying their own way to be here. We got to find better ways to keep them here, right? And there's a huge opportunity for employers telling us they need talent, but yet Cleveland State, Case Western, John Carroll, they have international students looking to stay here. So there's an opportunity for us right now over this next, especially through these difficult times, to really educate our current employers in the region and those that are looking at the region that we do have a base of dedicated students. I've been through that process. I was an international student here a long time ago. And how do we better educate our employers on how they can tap into that network? So there's barriers out there, but there's ways to overcome it as well. So just got to keep educating people.
Among the executive orders is there's a travel ban, there is increased scrutiny of work permits and enhanced vetting. I would assume that this would slow hiring, all of those things.
It would. Now, again, people ask us, are you hearing this as a barrier? Are companies coming and saying, oh, we're getting slowed down in the process? We're struggling to get companies to even join the process of going through the visa process with a potential employee. There's the fear factor of it. It takes too long. It's too expensive. It might have been back in the day. Margaret will attest to that. So we're not even getting to the point where they're getting to the final step of, well, you got to do this or do that. We have issues getting employers just to believe the system works. There is a system out there. There's various different visas they can tap into and utilize folks like Margaret Wong and Associates, but that's getting them to that first step. Yeah, that's a plug. You can send me a check later. That's okay.
Yeah.
So.
Margaret, what are you hearing and what are you finding specifically with regard to even routine visa applications?
A lot of companies nowadays are refusing, it's on record, they would not sponsor H-1s, would not sponsor green cards. So that took up a lot of foreign students because foreign students now have OPT after graduation and then CPT.
I'm sorry, what do those letters mean?
Optional practical training that I was on, and I'm sure Mark, we all use that 18 months, 12 months, and STEM OPT was 24 months of training. But then afterwards, what do you do? Because most employers, if they don't want to sponsor you for H-1B, then we're out of luck. Then we have to either go home or became undocumented. And for Indians and Chinese, it's worse because it takes 12 years for Indians to get EB3, EB2 green cards. And for Chinese, it's 5 or 6 or 7 years because we have so many people here. So it's really a complicated, but it's not that hard. Years and years ago, it's more complicated. But since actually Obama came in, Biden came in, Trump came in, they changed the system. So it's really not hard. I think you're right. We should educate people on these visas.
And one thing I'd add, the students that we're seeing coming here, the research we're getting is they're taking courses that are relevant to the core industries in our region right now, the core sectors, right? So we know the future jobs in 5 years. The students that are here today are educating themselves in those sectors. So if employers can realize that the future workforce is already here in their backyard, it's just how do we get them to get to that next step and just get away that fear factor of a long process. It's not as hard as it really is.
You know, Margaret, one of the things you just said reminded me that most of the so-called unauthorized immigrants are actually people who are overstaying visas. They're not border crossers or asylum seekers.
Some are not, right? Because years and years ago, we used to just cross for 4 days, you walk, and some of us get raped, some of us get assaulted, so we go back and we come back, some of us die. But nowadays, it started actually with Trump 1, we send them to a line. So we make them volunteer at the door. So that's how they apply for asylum. That's how all the 42, all these new laws came in saying that remain in Mexico, because instead of coming in illegally, now they all come in sort of legally, but going through the line. And that started about 10 years ago, really.
What should, if, I assume there's somebody who is undocumented or unauthorized status right now watching us, watching this forum.
Hello, I'm here. I can help you.
Besides reaching out to you.
216.
Yeah. What?
sorry,
No, it's
Don't be
exactly it. I
scared.
mean, what should they do?
First, if you are stopped, always ask for your A number, always, because I have clients that stop, they're so nervous and scared to just freeze. Don't freeze. It's just like women having childbirth. You're lonely, you're alone. It doesn't matter your partner, your loved ones, whoever is there, midwife, you are alone.
That is not the metaphor I was thinking of at all.
Put your hands on top of the wheel
And breathe.
and breathe. Take a deep breath. Don't put your hand into a pocket for your wallet. That's a big no-no, because those people are as scared as we are. They also have families that are not trained. These people are not the FBI, the CIA. These people are just ICE agents. Ask number one, what's my numero A? Number two, maybe get their business cards. You'll be amazed how many scams are out there. And ask to show that, look at that badge, and don't let them hammer you. If you're at home, if you're working, and we all work illegally, you see. So ultimately, always ask for a search warrant. And always ask the officer, can you let me go? I have young children at home, I have a wife at home, I have older mother at home. I will report tomorrow with my lawyer, with my loved ones to CIS. They may say yes, they may say no. But these are the steps. But don't run, because if you run, they will shoot. These people are scared just like we are. You think you're scared, they're probably more scared than you are. They have to fill the quotas. Otherwise, they lose their jobs.
Thank you, Margaret. Joe.
You know, it's Selena and Margaret and Mark, you know, there's such a sense of fear, right? And when you read some of the policies and thinking that's going on out there about flooding the zone, and you mentioned, I think, 30 executive orders, there's over 75. I think there's an intentional chaos. And it's easy, and I say this as someone, you know, raised in an immigrant family, it's easy to think the fear. But the way that we get past it is obviously the stuff that Margaret's talking about, the facts that Mark is discussing in the community that Selena is. But like, I'm looking out in the audience right now, and I'm thinking about Marcia Marino. She runs 100 Latinos You Need to Know. Chile gave us one of their bets. She's here in Northeast Ohio. She's going to wake up tomorrow and do what's right for Northeast Ohio, right? There's a guy named Joe Marinucci that nobody knows was born in Italy. That's the reason that the Downtown Cleveland Alliance was formed. We have to focus on the things, not that we hope for, but that are working. And I'm not a Pollyanna. What's happening in the communities that are being terrified, the Ukrainians are terrified. The people from Afghanistan are terrified. But it's like every single day we have to remember this is a marathon, and we have to continue in the networking and the community that we have, because it's the only way that we're going to be able to get to the point where in 2029, like 23 and 24, we will have record demographic growth.
Selena,
I'm gonna add to that because I've been thinking about that part around, you know, the long game and like how we think about this more strategically. We're not running around like chickens with our heads cut off, right? Because that's what people want us to do. And, you know, part of it is like, how do we ground our organizations and our vehicles for change through anti-racist practices, right? Like, because at the end of the day, if we are not being intentional about grounding ourselves and being actively anti-racist, we are not going to support the most marginalized people. And I know there's a lot of folks who probably don't want to talk about racism. I know it's a trigger, but we have to. We have to have these uncomfortable conversations to truly move forward as a collective. If not, we are leaving people on the side and behind and everywhere in between if we do not face these conversations up front. No matter what you think or what you feel, like, we have to put ourselves in uncomfortable conversations, because this is uncomfortable for me to talk about immigration because my perspective and my reality is different, but I know that folks are being left behind. And if we only reduce immigrants to economic utility, like, we are losing the humanity and dignity of people. And like, we as a nation need to find that humanity, because we have left that a long time ago. And I don't think we were founded on dignity and humanity of people. And so we really have to have those uncomfortable conversations. And I know the data and all of the numbers and all the stuff that supports those pieces are there, but we have to talk about the fluffy stuff that I say bad words
That
a lot,
is
so
so
I'm saying
powerful.
stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that, I'm gonna leave it there, Dan. I
Keep
promise.
going.
I think sometimes, Mark, we had a chance to, Selena's talking about uncomfortable conversations. I was in probably one of the most uncomfortable conversations I've been in my life, and that's saying a lot, in October when the Cleveland Jewish Federation hosted the leadership of the Haitian community from Springfield. Uncomfortability layered on uncomfortability. And for a community that has lived, through generations of anti-Semitism, to share how you make yourself safe to a Black, Haitian, targeted community, there were moments of absolute agony and moments of absolute truth. And to me, if you want to talk about solidarity and organizing and partnership, we have it within us in this room. Whether it was my mom who immigrated, you're an incredible Puerto Rican, brilliant person, or you're immigrants themselves, that we have to share it. Secondly, there are many audiences here. And there are a lot of people south of 71 that maybe didn't meet a Selena or a Margaret or a Mark. And if we are going to have this conversation in a great state like Ohio, there has to be a sense of understanding. Maybe they haven't had the chance to work with newcomers like we do. And sometimes things like data and hard truths can be had when you're having that, because the goal is to change the system.
Yes.
Thank you, Joe Cimperman. Mark Owens and Margaret Wong, I wanted to ask you kind of a more personal question. Both of you are immigrants. This looks on its face like an attack on immigrants, immigration, et cetera. And I wonder how you're feeling as a human being, Margaret.
Mark, you want to go?
Ladies first.
Okay, ladies first. I don't
Don't even
feel
go there.
anything. I go to work every day. I try to go swimming. You try to divorce yourself from your client, because anytime you feel too much, like this morning, I talked to an El Salvadorian woman, was pregnant with a child, already gave birth to a child at 15, so she must have sex at 14. And then the guy is 13 years older than her. So I'm thinking, oh, that's a very good asylum case. Woman from El Salvador abused, right? You have to have 5 grounds and stuff. And I said, was he abusive? No. Did he date other women? Oh, yeah, is that abuse? I'm like, hello? And then since the little one, now she's 50. I know I talk too much. She already have 4 kids. So I keep leading her. Do you have an asylum claim? No. But a single woman with 4 kids in America, she came in year 2003. Husband never, when this idiot man never came. And then she brought all those 4 kids to America. The kids now have grandkids. And I'm representing the whole family. I look at her and I say, that woman is such a hero to me, And she doesn't even think she's a victim. She doesn't think of abuse. She just needs to survive. Bring each kid separately. Now the kids have grandkids who are American citizens. Now they're thinking, how do we use that to help her and her other kids? And her middle kid actually was raped on the way. So these are things, that's why it's hard. We are messengers. We are really the foot soldiers, immigration lawyers, helping the government accomplish their role of getting the criminal, which is which is okay. You know, of course we don't want criminals in this country. Of course we need to give them a social so they can file tax return. Of course, you know, there's things that, you know, it's just weird, but I'm just telling you, as you cannot, it's just like a doctor never represent your family. As an immigrant, you cannot think, because I could be that woman. I could be, only have a 7th grade education, slept with a 13-year-old man, with parents both died. And I tell myself, Margaret, stop it. This is a case. You have to finish the case. You don't feel sorry for them, because then you lose control. You control as the leader of your team, as the leader of your client, and especially these men and women, I don't know, attract all these sad stories, sob stories, and I feel for them. But you have to, I mean, as immigrants like us, we have to divorce ourselves from them and stop thinking me, me, me. As all 4 of us are thinking, we have to think of the situation. There's something so much bigger than just me or us.
I did ask you about you, though.
Oh, sorry.
Like, how are you?
Go swimming. I have 4 grandkids. I lost my husband 10 years ago. I do very well. Yes, and I'm okay. Thank you.
Good. Mark?
Why are you looking so weird?
I care about you, Margaret. I care about you.
Thank you.
These are difficult times.
Yes.
Mark?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, you know, as an immigrant, I came here in the late 90s on a scholarship to go to John Carroll. And it was through the peace process of the Troubles in Northern Ireland where I got my scholarships. It's kind of ironic I came here because of a conflict, right? You know, our conflict was religious. It was Protestants and Catholics, right? But you talk about racism, and I grew up in that kind of the midst of that, and to get away from it kind of thing was a relief. And so coming here as an immigrant and having the opportunity to go to John Carroll was one of the best opportunities I've ever had, and go through that process of every visa in the alphabet, right? There's all different ones. It's like M&Ms. There's multiple different colors of them, right? So, but one of the proudest moments I had was July 15, 2011. I became a U.S. citizen, and that day, thank you. That day gave me a sense of relief of, okay, now I can't be sent back, or I'm in the system permanently. There's always that fear in a visa program of visas can change. They can change the rules, right? But once you become a citizen, my process wasn't as hard maybe as it is for others, so I got to acknowledge that. But that day becoming a citizen, it gave me that security blanket of I'm here for good. And now I look at other immigrants that come here, that want to come here. Now it's hard for them. It's not that easy anymore. They're choosing other countries maybe. I know Irish students are choosing Australia, they're choosing Canada because the US system is harder now to get into. I would love to see more Irish immigrants selfishly here in the region, right? That's obviously a passion.
Yeah, the Irish community here is so small.
It's very tiny. You might have heard of them, yeah. We have this little parade coming up in a few weeks, so you might have heard of it. So, but yeah, so it's hard to watch, given that, you know, we all know immigrants, you saw the room when the hands went up, they're some of the most dedicated workforce you'll ever get anywhere, are immigrants. They'll show up to work, they'll be on time, they'll work hard to give back to their family, give back to their communities. No gossip. Yeah. Oh, the Irish have gossip, don't get me wrong. So.
Chinese too.
That's a whole other forum. But anyhow, so it's hard to watch, but yeah.
Mark, thank you so much. Mark Owens is with Team NEO. Margaret Wong, of course, the founding and managing partner of Margaret W. Wong and Associates, LLC, a very important international immigration law firm. Selena Pagan is with the Young Latino Network, and Joe Cimperman is the president of Global Cleveland. And we're going to move to questions from all of you now. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and one of our colleagues here at the City Club will let you know when it's your turn to come to the microphone. If you want to text your question, you can text it to 330-541-5794. The number again is 330-541-5794. Can we have our first question? Okay, Merle Johnson makes her way to the microphone one more time.
Good afternoon. This is such an important topic. There's a group that wasn't mentioned today, and that's teachers, principals, students, K-12. On social media, there's a panic going on. Teachers and principals, what do I do? So can you just give some steps that educators can take when ICE enters the building?
I'll say this. Thank you, first of all, Ms. Johnson, for all your service, first as a teacher and then as a representative for education in Ohio. We appreciate you. Organizations like Global Cleveland and others have had consults and will continue to with any teacher or principal about what Margaret was talking about, but also the resources that are out there. There are many resources still for communities. The fact that the hat was passed around for the refugee organizations and we're on our way to closing a gap, which was pretty big, is an indication of Northeast Ohio's generosity. But so too are the networks that are out there. Obviously, Young Latino Network and all the other folks that are there to help. If you go to our website, globalcleveland.org, there's actually stuff online that's free. We have, without naming teachers in schools, had about a dozen conversations with the Cleveland School District and others, and will continue to do so. I will say one thing, and I say this because we're focusing on the deficits in some levels of our government. Our county executive and our mayor have been extraordinary. They have stood up and stood with, and so has our council people like Councilwoman Santana and Council President Blaine Griffin and other folks that are there. There is this conversation about what more they can do, and I think there's a sense that as local folks, we have to do what we can and be prepared. We have to continue to work together, but as a wonderful person named Sheriff Pertel said to me, you can't bleed before you're cut. And we cannot get ahead of ourselves. We have to be mindful of what's happening, and I'm grateful that so many of our teachers have reached out, but if anybody needs to, just go to our website. We're more than willing to talk to anybody.
Thank you.
Has the employers who are impacted by these moves in immigration that are adversely impacted, are they organizing to push back? And if they're not, how come?
Mark Owens, what are you hearing?
Honestly, it's not something we've been brought into that conversation. Again, I'm getting some of that coverage from what you're hearing in the media, so I wouldn't personally. Those type of employers were not being brought into that conversation at this point.
I can help you.
Margaret.
I have actually talked, thank you. I also have talked to some employers, but basically most employers are embarrassed. They're scared because there is like illegal transport laws, there's illegal hire, that's I-9 check, that what we call the 72-hour notice. That means that within 3 days of hire, including everybody in this room, any American citizens, anybody, you have to fill out I-9. They could come and check it. It's just a pain in the neck process, especially for big companies. So most employers, they don't want to talk about it. It reminds me of like, we never talk about when we come to America, how do we feel? Or at least I didn't answer your question. I still remember the hunger, the cold. You don't want to talk about things, the Holocaust. We don't talk unless we're very old. Now it's sort of glamorous now. So the journey is difficult. And to answer your question, what should you do? Again, it's lonely. It's when ICE drop in, they normally come cars in front, cars at the back. Always ask for a search warrant. I would not even though it's a public property, it's a school, it's not for profit, absolutely, number one, ask for search warrant. Number two, immediately call your board chair, because whoever is your board, they're very powerful people. They need to call the senators, the congressmen. America still have a law. People just can't, another thing which is nice, I thought, is at least in our school records, they couldn't go through our school and say, this kid have documents, that kid have no document, that kid is a child of illegals, stuff, or undocumented, stuff like that. So I think absolutely search warrant, and not fight them, be very nice about it, but I hope I answered your questions.
Selena?
I think to Ms. Johnson's question and to this question too, for the employers and for the educators or just folks running organizations, right? We've seen practices of posting more like private spaces, like making sure you have signage in your establishment so folks can't just go in. And then there's a lot of education around the warrants, right? Like there are different warrants. ICE can issue a warrant. Some need to be judicial warrants. And there's a lot of people need to see the actual copies of what they're looking at so that we know what to spot, so that we don't start making assumptions. And then for the entire community, we need to stop saying we see ICE and not posting a picture or posting times, stamps, or whatever, because we're just instilling fear. And folks are running amok, like panicking around an ICE spotting or an ICE raid when it might not have been that. And so we've been seeing a lot of that. We've had Latina businesses get audited by ICE and request I-9 audits, right? And people do not think about that at all. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question.
Margaret especially, I'd like some broader perspective. You know, we know families, Filipino families who it's been 15 years are going through a legal process, can't get it. Veronica Dahlberg and Ola, they've been working on this 30 years or so. And Joe, before, even when he was a councilman, was working on this. You've been doing this for decades. I think the last broad immigration law in the U.S. was 1965. And since then, we've had both sides of the aisle, liberal, conservative, everything. Why can't the U.S. come up with a comprehensive, modern immigration program? I think you'd have people on both sides to get rid of some of these ridiculous policies.
I totally agree with you. The problem is we couldn't elect the people we thought we could have policies, and people are coming more and more to one side and to the other side. But now it is what it is, so we just have to work through the next 4 years, get work permits, protect. So now instead of worrying about when would I get my green card, we should worry about how do I fight deportation, how do we need children, my children who grows up in America, you know, become Americans, and don't be scared about it. I've heard immigration lawyers go into schools to second grade and explain to them what what is this, you know? Let them be second graders. Don't scare them, they're gonna lose their parents. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
If there were to be a serious effort towards immigration reform, what are the top 3 changes you would want to see?
Number 1, change 245I. That means that in April 30th of 2001, right before 9/11, and then President Fox came, the whole law went down. If you didn't file something before April of 2001, then you never get a green card. That law never changed. That's the first thing I would do. Number 2, change some definitions of criminal law, because criminal law mostly is a state law. So you have 51 states, 50 states in America, and you have 6th Circuit, which is very conservative, but we are changing. 2nd Circuit, so you have all these laws in these circuits. We should make it like one. It cannot just because I violated a law in New York, it's different from Ohio, it's different from, and then a governor like Bloomberg was giving amnestia to some people. So this is the second thing. The third thing I would change is change all those. You cannot just have country-specific TPS. Like when Mary Rose Oka
Temporary
was here.
protected status.
That's right. So Mary Rose Oka, Lebanon got TPS, and then she retired. No more TPS for Lebanese. Now Sudan have TPS. Now President comes and say, oh, no more TPS. You can't do that. There has to be world specific. You can't have one nation because they have a powerful leader and then come in with this TPS, with this DED, and Hong Kong now have DED because they don't like China and Hong Kong. It's not a matter of like, this is a country, you know? I mean, only 250 years of history.
Only.
So,
Mark, I want to say one thing to Dan, who, by the way, if you guys don't know, clevelandpeople.com is the place to get international news in Cleveland. Clevelandpeople.com is amazing, really, Dan. You're an outstanding person, and you see people. You know, it's interesting because Mark hit it, and Margaret too. We don't have enough workers for the economic pace that we're currently keeping in Ohio. Demographically, it's metric, it's boring. I talk about it so much I put myself to sleep. But the truth is, we cannot sustain the life that we have if we don't have the people to do it. And I think that when you look at it through the lens of workforce and economic development versus fear and or charity, you start to really see that if we're going to continue this experiment of America, we have to recognize that our economic policies are 60 years ahead of our immigration policies. Now, until Congress and the White House decide they want to do something, we have to figure out, as Cleveland often does, what to do when the cavalry isn't coming. I'm going to share one statistic with you. We all love Dave Gilbert and Hannah Belcito. They bring so many great things to Cleveland.
Destination Cleveland.
Destination Cleveland. The NCAA Women's Final Four. The All-Star Game, Major League Baseball. the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame visitors events that happen every 3 years, the NBA All-Star Game, the RNC, these are all mostly one-time, one-year events. They are all below the annual revenue that international students bring to Northeast Ohio. Every year, we have an RNC or an All-Star Game or Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We have to change the narrative from they are bad, they are the other, the racial issues, the way that we discriminate, to these are folks that are making all of our lives better, whether we realize it or not. And if we help a little bit, all of our lives could be better.
I'm sorry. I swear, last one.
Selena, pick up.
I think to that point too is also, like we brought up politics, it's civic education and civic engagement, right? And that's where Cleveland Votes is in the house, one of our OGs, okay? There is a lot of political education that needs to happen, especially with the narrative change, to understand what the impact of these things are. And we saw how damaging the narrative control and the messaging of things in politics harms us. And now we're living it in real life, and we've been living it, and our communities are, suffering for decisions that are made based on messaging and taking over the narrative. And that is real. It causes actual harm all the time.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got a question from MC Squared STEM High School.
Hi, my name's Xavier Farmer from MC2 STEM High School. My question is, what are your opinions on how as a community can we make immigrants feel safer and better to live in America rather than living other else in the world?
Mark Owens, you first.
I saw you looking at me. Corner of my eye. So I guess your question was relating to how do we make it a better community for our immigrants? Obviously, if you look at Global Cleveland, the whole welcoming city aspect, right? How do we make Cleveland a more international city and more a welcoming city? We see that a lot when we bring international visitors here on business attraction visits. They're amazed at the international communities we have in Northeast Ohio, right? So, but it's, how do we then, if we bring those companies here and those immigrants come with them, making sure they see themselves as part of the Northeast Ohio community. So there's a lot of great, Dan Hansen, as Joe mentioned, Dan highlights all these different immigrant communities within the Cleveland area, and there's more than you can imagine. If you go on his website and you'll see all these different communities, it's unreal. Every little community can do their little piece. They have community centers, they have cultural centers, you have the cultural gardens, things like that, making sure they're aware of where their country is being highlighted within the city. So there's a lot of things already happening that maybe there should be more awareness of. You look at the Slovenian Center, you look at the Hungarian Center, there's Irish Cultural Centers, all these different places that, how do we kind of lift those up and make people aware that they're there and they're welcoming. You go to one of these centers, you're inside that building, you're safe, and that they should know that if they go to different cultural centers, they are safe within those buildings. And I think a lot of it just goes back to that education, just like I talked about employers being educated on how easy the system is, educating some of our communities how they can play a role and not be afraid of the noise, and don't make noise if you don't have to, and just be part of that, just be welcoming. So seems simple, sorry.
And to that point, it's not just Taco Tuesday, right? Y'all need to really support communities across the board, not just showing up for a food special, but supporting and know when to show up, right? What spaces are meant for folks who are not part of these communities to experience our communities, and when are you supposed to show up? Because sometimes the problem with this, if folks outside of certain cultural communities take over a space versus showing up and being present and experiencing and immersing yourself in community. And I know there's a community tour tonight at Julia de Burgos that I think is gonna be a good old time that you guys should try to check out, right? But I think you also have to realize how we show up into spaces to experience it and support, right? Support the small businesses that are from all of these different countries. We have such a dope business sector here of retail, from African businesses to Eastern European businesses to Latina businesses, and that is very powerful. Put your money where your put your money where your mouth is.
That's right.
Right? Go support, spend those dollars, because our communities need those dollars. Okay, I'm done. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon. We have a text question. This question is for Joe Cimperman. The current executive orders have paused resettlement funds for SIVs as well. What message does this send to future wartime allies of the U.S.?
SIV's special immigrant visa, which goes with P1, P2. For our sisters and brothers, a lot from Afghanistan who fought along our armed forces, gave their lives, and protected our American Navy, Marine, and Army folks from dying. I think you kind of know what I think about that visa. I don't want to call people out. We have brothers and sisters in this room who came here from Afghanistan, who kept a lot of our armed forces alive. I don't think that there is a greater promise a country can make than if you help us, we'll help you. That's an interesting point because there is a movement now among a lot of conservative veterans that are quietly lobbying our Congress today that we have to remember the people, regardless of what you think about the Afghanistan war and the conflicts, we have to remember the people who literally gave their lives and in many ways kept us alive. Cleveland's home to a large Afghanistan community. It's growing. They're amazing. Bakht, you are just one example of so many of our Afghanistan sisters and brothers. You make our lives better every day. And so I'll say, like Selena said, there are so many nuances to this, and we will continue to advocate and make the argument. And hope that when you look at who our Secretary of Defense is and recognizing that there are a lot of people who are making decisions who are military themselves, that they would remember that and they would know. I'll say one thing to Xavier. Your question shows such an insight, and there are many places to get to know the world here in Northeast Ohio. May Dugan Catholic Charities are just two of them, resettling folks from Congo, Venezuela, all over. There's just a lot of great opportunities. And I'm going to say this to you because I think you're a lot younger than me. You've already gotten it right, Xavier. You've already gotten it right. Whatever it is that you're thinking and you're doing, just asking that question is exactly what we can do, which is to see how we can be there for our sister and brother. And I just want to say, Xavier, you're pretty cool, and I'll work on your campaign.
That is so nice. Yeah.
There's a question about how much attention, energy we should put to this threat. So there's been a lot of talk at the administration level about a mass deportation, 11, 12 million. There's been talk about concentration camp being open in Guantanamo Bay. Are these do you have a sense that these are opening moves toward this happening? How much energy should we be devoting to alerting fellow citizens and immigrant friends about this? Or is this just noise to cause more fear, and if we draw attention to it, only increases fear? What's your sense of what's happening on the ground? Are these camps going to be opening? Will the military be brought in to bring deportations up to the scale of tens of millions?
Thank you. Margaret, do you have a...
I haven't seen a lot of people resisting or getting detained that have serious criminal record. Maybe it's only, but we have offices around the country. So you may, that's a very good question. I just know that, as Selena said, that fear, I think sometimes it became so irrational that that's why I think Mr. Dan is asking me, how do you feel? Because the negative vibes is coming into us, the messengers. But I haven't seen too much. And most people who's not desperate to be here, who have no family, no spouses, they're telling us they just want to go. They just want a voluntary departure instead of a removal so they can come back. But that's a very good question.
Voluntary departure. That's like the self-deportation that
That's like, I want to
people have
leave
discussed.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, who's got the next question? Here we go.
I am short, and I'm wearing heels. Hi, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces. Maybe a lot of you know me. My name is Isabel Rodriguez. I was a deputy constituency director for the Ohio Democratic Party through the Sherrod Brown campaign. And though I will not get into politics, I stand a little bit in between both lines, right and left. I grew up in Akron, moved back, lived in North Carolina, Cary, North Carolina, work a lot with Allison, Margaret One's daughter, in the Research Triangle. So after 11 years, I relocated myself back here, and I am questioning why I did it. But the winter hasn't been the easiest. I want to stay. I want to stay because I have really loved to embrace our community and seen what Cleveland is about. And I have really learned to love my culture back here in Ohio. But being an immigrant, I have came to question myself in what we're doing from the root grounds, and not from a political perspective, not from a community, but from the grounds in our own homes. And it's not a question, but it's an advocacy on my behalf that we take into action from what we're doing at home with our own kids, with their own grandkids, and educating them and talking to them regarding the love that we should have for one another, no matter the color, the race, the religion, disabilities. It touches really close to me because I have a kid with disabilities. So like the discrimination aspect of every single level. So I do ask that we stop questioning so much in the political level, in the community level, but like do the work at home too, within each other.
Thank you.
That's my take.
That was a really great closing thought, and I think we're out of time. I'm so sorry, but I suspect this won't be the last time that we discuss these issues. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this today. Margaret Wong, Mark Owens, Selena Pagan, Joe Cimperman. Thank you all so much for being a part. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like all of you, and indeed many of you. You can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech at cityclub.org. The City Club would like to welcome students joining us from St. Martin de Porres High School and MC Squared STEM High School. Thank you all for being with us. Also, a special welcome to guests at tables hosted by the Cleveland Foundation, the Cleveland Teachers Union, Global Cleveland, IdeaStream Public Media, Margaret W. Wong and Associates, the Sisters of Charity Health System, the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, and the Young Latino Network. You guys are great. Thank you for being a part of this today. Up next at your City Club on Valentine's Day, on February 14th, we'll be joined by the authors of the book, The Case for Cities. It will be moderated by the next president of Baldwin Wallace University, Lee Fisher, and we'll have a conversation with experts in urban planning about what is needed to promote a viable and sustainable urban resurgence. I have no doubt immigration will be touched on at that conversation as well. You can learn more about that forum and everything coming up, new forums dropping weekly at cityclub.org. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. Thank you to our panelists. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Our forum's now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.